Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Sine Institute Fellow Seminar. My name is Ariana Bessenberg, and I'm a senior at the School of International Service. With a passion for international relations and policymaking, I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation, one that bridges policy, innovation, and leadership, which lie at the heart of the Sine Institute's mission. The Sine Institute serves as a dynamic hub for collaboration, bringing together the brightest minds from the public, private, academic, nonprofit, and journalism sectors. It fosters dialogue, drives policy innovation, and champions nonpartisan solutions. At its core, this institute is where American university comes together to convene, communicate, and collaborate, paving the way for meaningful change. Today, we are honored to have Sine Fellow Tara Palmeri and her featured guest, U.S. Representative Brendan Boyle. Join us for a conversation on the Democratic reckoning and how the Democrats lost the blue wall. Tara Palmeri is a renowned political correspondent and senior writer for Puck. Known for her fearless reporting, Tara has built her career uncovering the behind-the-scenes stories that shape Washington, D.C. and the political landscape. She has worked as a White House correspondent for ABC News and has reported on major global events, including Brexit and the Greek financial crisis, during her tenure at Political Europe. She's also the host for the podcast Somebody's Gotta Win, where she delves into the high-stakes world of political campaigns, offering deep analysis and insider perspectives on elections and power struggles shaping the country. Her guest, Congressman Brendan Boyle, represents Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District and is the ranking member of the House Budget Committee. Representing a key swing state, he has seen up close how Pennsylvania's political landscape has changed in recent years. In the 2024 election, Pennsylvania played a decisive role, flipping to Donald Trump and breaking from the Democratic blue wall. As one of the most closely watched battlegrounds, the state's shifting voter priorities have a major impact on the election outcome and will continue to shape the future of national politics. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Tara Palmeri and Congressman Boyle.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Congressman Boyle, ranking member of the Budget Committee, for coming. He is arriving from the Super Bowl, cheering on
Go Birds.
Yeah, literally glowing. I've never seen him this happy before. But yeah, this is a big day for you and your community. So we're appreciative that you came back from New Orleans.
If I might, it's a pleasure to be here at American University and to be with you, Tara. Had my flight been any later, I would have been coming straight here in my Eagles jersey, Eagles hat, and jeans. And a lot of people suggested maybe that would be actually a lot better. So
you know what? I like it. All right. So we're just gonna get down to it. And I definitely want to spend a lot of time on the blue wall and how do Democrats get it back? What happened this last election? I'll be honest. On election night, I was texting with the congressman to just get his numbers. Like, what was he hearing? What was he seeing? What were the lines like in Pennsylvania? I mean, there were reports that there were long lines, right? In Philadelphia, which is the district that you are a member, where you are a member, part of Philadelphia, the Collier County area. And I just wanted to hear, is it true? You know, are there really long lines in the voting booth? And that would obviously be a good thing for Democrats. And you had said to me at the time, it's not as good as it should be.
yeah. So first, I mean, I have learned, I've been in politics now for 20 years between the state legislative level and Congress. And I have learned to always be careful about anecdotal information you hear on election day. Everyone calls around wanting to know what's happening, what are you seeing? It is almost often the case that it is incorrect or grossly exaggerated. That is more so true now than ever, because unlike when I started, you have the phenomenon of mail-in voting and early voting. And so while you could gauge some things maybe 20 years ago and in PA still 10 years ago by what you saw on election day, that's no longer the case, because you don't know if you're actually you're seeing people, but you know, you've already banked a number of votes. A lot of people sometimes get false hope from the early vote numbers, but they don't realize they're balkanizing their election day turnout. That was the case for Hillary Clinton in Florida in 2016. Both sides at the time erroneously thought, and the media thought, that Hillary Clinton was going to win in Florida, as Barack Obama had twice. What they didn't realize at the time was really she was just eating out of her totals that would have shown up on election day. So we talked a lot over the last, couple of years and including on your podcast. And as you know, I said I always thought it was going to be a roughly 1 to 2 point race. That's what it was in Pennsylvania. That's what it was in the other blue wall states, or formerly blue wall states of Michigan and Wisconsin. What I didn't expect though, so I got that right about Pennsylvania and the battleground states, that it was a pretty close election with Trump winning narrowly. What I didn't foresee though is that it was a very different election in non-battleground states, both in very deeply blue states like New Jersey, New York and California, as well as deeply red states. Republican numbers, they did much better than they had in previous elections.
Yeah, I will have to call you on this.
I did predict Democrats would win.
By half a percentage point.
I also predicted the Eagles would win the Super Bowl, so I'm 1 for 2.
But you know what? I'm all about calling people out on this show.
Yes.
And by the way, we are recording for my podcast, Somebody's Gotta Win. It's on the Ringer Network, and you guys can all listen to this in a few days when it uploads. If you want to hear it again, and for new listeners that need to dip out. But yeah, so we'll get back to that. But I actually am just like dying to hear about these Musk incels, the Doge kids that are running around. And I've just got to assume that these are people that are sort of poking around your domain, which is the budget committee. I mean, I know appropriations is an obvious place to look, but have you had any interaction with these like 20-somethings that Elon Musk has basically sicked on Congress and all of the agencies?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I haven't met any, but if people are wondering what this is really about, it's about power and about whether or not we will continue to have 3 co-equal branches of government that provides a system of checks and balances. Because, as everyone knows, the way it typically is, in order to enact legislation, impact policy, you need to get a bill passed through the House, passed through the Senate, very long, laborious process, and signed into law by the president. 4 years ago, when we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, for example, that was exactly how it passed. Lo and behold, the Trump folks come in, and Elon Musk and his crew, and they're running wild. What they want to say is, we don't care that this is legislation. We're going to illegally withhold this money and fire people. Well, if they want to impact policy, the way to do it is to pass legislation. Their withholding funds is patently illegal, period. Just over the weekend, while I was, busy concentrating on football, I did see the comments of J.D. Vance saying that if there's a court decision, they would just ignore it. That's about the same thing. That is about the executive branch saying, we don't care what the judiciary tells us. We don't care what the legislative branch tells us. We are going to illegally grab this power so we can pursue our own agenda. It's bad on the substance what they're doing, and it'll be very harmful in so many ways, but it's also extremely dangerous in terms of what it implies about where we're headed as a country.
Are you concerned that members of Congress can't even get into departments and agencies, into federal buildings?
Yes, I am. I mean, one of the core functions of Congress, we always look at it in terms of legislation, and that gets covered a lot, but one of the core functions of Congress, of the legislative branch, is to preside or provide oversight of the executive agencies. A number of the hearings we have tend to be oversight hearings. In Budget Committee, we have oversight, for example, of OMB, as well as CB, Office of Management and Budget, as well as the Congressional Budget Office. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. We have jurisdiction over the IRS and provide oversight over IRS as well as Treasury at large. It is very disturbing what is going on right now, and even as recently as the last few hours, a report going out there telling everyone at USAID not to report from work or to cease what you're doing. I believe that also just happened at CFPB, the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau. Very, very disturbing things that are going on that, frankly, are autocratic.
Yeah, I mean, the threat is to basically cease these congressionally approved payments. And the truth is that they have a budget coming up in the next few months. They could change the way money is appropriated.
They can do exactly what Democrats did 4 years ago. They have the House, the Senate, and the White House. Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican White House. If they really think eliminating funding for cancer research is such a good idea, let them go get that bill passed. When we wanted to enact, we on the Democratic side 4 years ago, the American Rescue Plan, which accelerated getting shots in arms and a whole host of things. Whether you agree with that legislation or not, we went about it legally, passed the House, passed the Senate, took it was quite the process, that combined with some of the other initiatives we passed, especially the Inflation Reduction Act. But that's the way it happens. You can't just have the executive branch say, we're going to ignore the law, we're gonna ignore the Constitution, and we're gonna grab power, and we're gonna put these unelected people into agencies, getting into the back-end computer system. You talk about our right to privacy in this country. Anyone who's concerned about a right to privacy should be very concerned about what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing too is that the budget that they are messing with is the one that they Republican-led Congress approved.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, for the last 2 years, Republicans have actually run a lot more of what has happened in Congress since they have controlled the House and have controlled the Senate. When I talked about 4 years ago, that period of the Democratic trifecta or full control, that was only a 2-year period from 2021 to 2022. The last 2 years, Republicans have had the majority in the House and the majority in the Senate.
Yeah, okay, but is there anything that you agree with that Musk is doing?
Well, I wouldn't say they've been too transparent. Look, the prospect though of actually focusing on how we can make government efficient or reducing or eliminating wasteful spending, in practice, or excuse me, in theory, I'm very much a supporter of that idea. In fact, 30 years ago when I was in high school, I remember a big Clinton-Gore initiative was reinventing government, and it was doing exactly these kind of things. But in practice, they actually went about the hard work of trying to identify those areas where there was wasteful spending going on and working to eliminating it. And I think they were credited at the time on a bipartisan basis with achieving real success. So yes, in theory, government efficiency is absolutely something that's right up my alley. But in practice, that's not at all what is happening. It is about a unilateral power grab.
It's interesting though, I mean, a lot of the programs that they're going after are unpopular domestically, whether we'd like to admit it or not, like USAID. A lot of people are saying, I'm struggling at home, why are we sending money abroad? And that is something that is difficult to counter, a lot of the messaging. Or even now, you learn that it costs $3.96 to print pennies. So it's like, okay, maybe we should stop printing pennies. Some of the information that they're putting out there is just blatantly false. Especially, and then once the genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to bring it back in, especially with Musk on Twitter all day long. But there are things out there that people could probably wrap their head around. And in fact, CBS's new poll found that Americans see Trump as tough, energetic, focused, and effective. And he has a 53% approval rating. Not amazing, but certainly a lot better than Biden's.
Not at the beginning. I mean, typically presidents in the very beginning of their term have higher approval ratings. In fact, while Trump's is over 50%, although in some polls it's high 40s, I would point out when you compare that to where Reagan, where both Bushes, where Clinton, where Obama, and where even Joe Biden were at this point in their presidencies, Trump actually has the lowest approval rating of a new president.
Yeah, it's interesting though, 2/3 of Americans say he's not focused enough on prices and inflation.
Bingo. I mean, going back to the beginning of the conversation, but what determined this election? Why were Republicans able to win by 1 point in Wisconsin and 1.5 points in Michigan and Pennsylvania, as well as a few points more in the other battleground states, and thus win the election? They won it because of runaway inflation that began to occur once we essentially turned the spigot back on, coming back from the pandemic. That is why the incumbent party in every single Western democracy, and not just Western democracies, Asian democracies as well, has either lost power or lost vote share. This past year was the first time since 1905 that every single party in power did so poorly at the polls. So yeah, there are unique reasons why Democrats didn't do as well at the presidential level, although I would point out Democrats actually picked up a seat in the House of Representatives. But even though there were those individual reasons and those specifically American reasons, we have to take a step back and recognize, geez, when you see the same phenomenon going on in Germany, the UK, Japan, South Korea, the US, Canada, countries in South America, there is something bigger going on. And it relates back to the inflation crisis. So as the months go by, and Donald Trump is not able to actually lower prices like he promised, I think they will pay a real political price.
Do you think he has distracted voters though with everything he's doing, creating the impression that he's doing a lot, whether it's just breaking glass, making noise, and it feels like it's 3 steps forward, 10 steps back with all of his initiatives, and maybe voters are like, well, he's trying, it's better than what we had before, which was basically a non-existent president that people rarely saw. A lot of it is like.
I really struggle, so I've actually thought quite a bit about this sort of a question. And I think back to a focus group that I personally witnessed in Philadelphia just 3 weeks before the election. And it was a focus group of specifically non-college educated younger males in Philadelphia, the biggest city of the biggest battleground state. And one of the first questions, when I say I watched the focus group, the way this works is there's a one-way mirror, they can't see me, and a group of other folks who are taking notes, really attempting to learn from a critical slice of the electorate in the biggest battleground state. And the moderator pretty early on asked the question, oh, so where do you get your news? 0 said broadcast, and there were about 6 of them. 0 said broadcast news. 0 said cable TV. 0 said from a newspaper. It was podcasts, TikTok, and text chains with friends. And so in order to answer your question, do people see Trump as doing things, even if they're not necessarily productive or things that I wouldn't agree with, or things that a majority of people would agree with? In order for me to answer that question, I have to know how are they getting that information related to them. If they're consuming all of their information from Somebody's Gotta Win podcast,
Yep.
I got you got your plug in for you. They're getting one set of facts.
Right.
If you're getting it from Joe Rogan or from other podcasts on The Ringer, or from TikTok, they're not getting the same sort of facts that someone who is watching CNN and BBC World and reading the New York Times, let alone someone who is watching Newsmax and subscribing to blogs that are very right wing. And that's such a different landscape from the time when you and I were growing up.
So you're saying my podcast is the most balanced and obviously the place to go.
I think it's a very good podcast, notwithstanding the fact that I'm occasionally a guest. But you are a very successful journalist who works hard to get the facts. That's very different from what a lot of information you see on social media and how people can, especially younger people, consume information today and where they get their facts or so-called facts.
So my theory is that, part of the job of being the president is just presenting as the president and being there and looking and making people feel calm and basically watching the Trump show, right? Like you dominate the airwaves, you make people feel secure, it's your rhetoric, it's your performance. And that's what Trump is so great at, producing in the presidency, obviously. So former reality TV star, but I also think it's governance, right? And feeling like government is working, especially when things are chaotic, like when we had a coronavirus. The whole thing was we want to return to normalcy, so people chose Joe Biden. If there is chaos and it's caused by something outside of Trump or Trump himself, and people feel like the governance under the Republican leadership is not, reacting appropriately and their lives are somehow impacted, I could see in 2026. Well, I think the Democrats will win back the House anyway in 2026. But then the Democrats will get power back. The pendulum will swing. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, have they done anything so far, like with that budget freeze? I know for a few days, people said they couldn't get Medicare payments or VA access or public housing access. Like, have they done anything permanently so far that has impacted people in a way that you think that public sentiment is going to shift your way?
So a few thoughts on this. The first points you were making, I totally agree with you. The performance aspect of the job of the presidency, I think is very important, the stagecraft
Yeah.
Element of it. And that's not new. I mean, Ronald Reagan, of course, before becoming governor of California and two-term president who left office very popular. Someone once asked him, geez, how could someone who was an actor be president? And he said, you know, I can't imagine doing this job had I not been an actor. Because he understood, you know, the way he would be perceived on camera, even at different angles that were good for him, the stagecraft element of the job. And that came through. I mean, some of the most famous speeches in front of the Berlin Wall as a great backdrop. At Normandy, his 40th anniversary speech on the anniversary of D-Day, his speech when the Challenger explosion happened. That was someone who got the performance aspect of the job. So that has always been there, and I think, frankly, to his credit, that's probably the part of the job that Donald Trump does the best. It's the everything else part of it he does far less well. Now, to your second point about your question, have Republicans done anything that could cause permanent damage? Boy, the moment 2 weeks ago, it was late at night on a Monday night, exactly 2 weeks ago, that OMB memo came out, it was like flipping a switch. And what I mean is, and I think there are probably some in my party who won't like me saying this, but it's my belief, I think it's very much true. From election night until 2 weeks ago, most Democrats I knew, or certainly a lot of them, were dejected, depressed, demoralized, and really, and the ratings show this, actually tuning out from cable TV and other sources. And certainly I personally know people that I just described. Even myself, I have to say, as someone who is in this, as someone who is a lifelong political junkie, I found myself watching a lot more ESPN and not paying attention to some of the usual sources that I would. And the moment that OMB memo came out 2 weeks ago saying freeze all funding, my goodness, like night and day, people suddenly got energized. I'm going to have a telephone town hall tomorrow night in my district that we weren't planning on having. It's before our next regularly scheduled one, because we have gotten so many calls to our district offices as well as our DC office. And my experience is not unique. That's the case with all of my Democratic colleagues. So I have to say, and thinking back to how things were 8 years ago at this moment, I do see certain parallels.
Yeah, but have they frozen any programs or caused disruption during that freeze that is like irreparable?
So when those stories come out of people who were impacted by Medicaid, by VA, and those other areas, that's where it can have a real impact. I'd also say I don't get any impression that this administration is going to stop anytime soon. I mean, I think they will continue down this path and really dare the courts to stop them and prevent them from doing what they're doing, because it is patently illegal. And the part that scares me the most goes back to what J.D. Vance talked about or tweeted about this weekend. What happens if the Supreme Court, even this 6-3 Republican, 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, rules against them, and the Trump administration says no? You don't have a military, you don't have law enforcement, you can't enforce your order. Then we will be absolutely in a constitutional crisis unlike anything we've ever been before. I pray that that doesn't happen, but it is a plausible concern I have right now.
What happens next?
In that scenario?
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't know. I mean, it would be something that we would have never faced before as a country. And then it would be saying the courts don't matter, the Congress doesn't matter, all that matters is the executive branch. We would be in a very dangerous place as a country. And by personality type, I am not an alarmist by any means or a doomsday type, but I am realistic. And given what the administration has been talking about, including the Vice President of the United States, I think we have to be more open and clear-eyed about that possibility.
What do your Republican colleagues say?
So this is different from 8 years ago. 8 years ago, on the Republican side, you had the vast majority of my Republican colleagues were more of the traditional Reagan Bush mold, the kind of Republican I grew up with. They thought Trump was an aberration, thought he was going to lose. A number of them would speak out against him. And what happened? Slowly over time, Trump and MAGA took over the Republican Party. And you saw a lot of those folks either retire in 2018 or get primaried and lose, or retire in 2020 or primary and lose. You had a number who voted against Trump bravely on impeachment. There are only 2 of those left in the House of Representatives. The reality is there are so many House Republicans and Senate Republicans who are afraid to speak out against Trump, even in those areas where they disagree with them, because they're afraid they will get a MAGA primary challenger who is now funded by Elon Musk.
Right, there's a lot of money now behind those primary threats, and they just make them on X all the time. Okay, so Chuck Schumer sends out a Dear Colleague letter to his caucus today, telling, the caucus, Senate caucus, which I think you take leadership from there as well, from the Senate, that the.
No.
You don't?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't know. The House and Senate are pretty different. If Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader, and I think has a very good chance to be next speaker, if he sent out a Dear Colleague, that I would certainly be paying attention to.
Fair. So his 4 strategies to counter Trump are investigations, litigation through the courts, legislation, and party messaging.
So actually, Hakeem, Leader Jeffries sent a Dear Colleague letter last week that enumerated kind of 10 different ways of responding. But I think some of the main ones are legislating and using every point of leverage that we have. The next government funding shutdown is mid-March. I think that is a very important juncture where we as Democrats in the House especially will have a lot of leverage.
You'll just shut down the government?
I'm not, excuse me. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. Right now, Elon Musk is shutting down the government. So if there is a total government shutdown, it will be because of a total Republican failure to whip enough of their members in line in order to fund the government. I mean, can you imagine if 4 years ago with the Democratic House, the Democratic Senate, and the Democratic President, we had shut down the government? No one would be saying, oh, that was because of Republicans. Come on. If they're not able to do even the most basic function of government, that'll be on them. That will not be on any Democratic member. I also think, though, the other part of that strategy, there are 3 main categories I see it. The legislation is one, legislatively, that is. Number 2, what would be the litigation strategy. And so far, the court orders that have come out, whether the person was a Republican appointed judge or a Democratic president appointed judge, unanimously Trump has been losing in the courts. That's how over the line and egregious these things are. And then the final piece actually is mobilization. It's very important that people's voices, those who are concerned about what's going on, that they speak out and get active. And I know it's easy to be skeptical or even cynical at this moment. I would point back to 8 years ago when things were pretty similar. Trump is president, Republican House, Republican Senate. You remember their number 1 agenda item, repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Every expert could have told you that Obamacare was done for, Republicans were going to get rid of it. Trump talked about it every day. He talked about it during the campaign, talked about it as president. Their repeal bill did pass the House of Representatives. And then despite having a majority, and I think a 3-vote majority in the Senate.
Which is what they have now.
Correct, yeah, but it didn't pass.
Yeah, because
McCain, the thumbs down, as well as a few other Senate Republicans. And Obamacare is still the law of the land today, and some 30 million Americans have their health care because of it. That wouldn't have happened without the public outcry that took place over the early months and summer months of 2017. So I have seen mobilization have a real impact.
That and McCain had no love for Trump. And I think you have a few other characters in the Senate that he's pissed off, like
Well-
YOLO Mitch McConnell, who's basically,
You don't see an analogy there, perhaps?
yeah, no, I do.
Yeah.
It's like, you're on your, I don't wanna say last leg, but you're in your last 2 years and you wanna make a point.
Correct.
Exactly, so we'll see if Mitch McConnell comes through, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, they've been not difficult for Trump generally, moderates, but all right. I think we have to get back to the battleground, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you win things. You gotta win.
It is, I mean, it is all about Pennsylvania, as well as Michigan, Wisconsin. You'd also add the Sun Belt battlegrounds of Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina, but they were a little further in margin. I've always believed that the shortest path to 270 for Democrats was through those northern industrial states. That's how I call them because I can't stand the term Rust Belt. So that's a little my own quirk. But in my view, the shortest path for Democrats back to the White House in 2028 would be Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And again, in all three of them, it was a 1.5 point race. I think that in 2026, like you, just because of the nature of midterm elections, I'm very confident Democrats will win back the House. I think Senate, possibility, but a little more difficult because the numbers are further. But then for 2028, I think we're right back. It's an early prediction, but I think like 2016, like 2020, like 2024, I would be very, very surprised if 2028 weren't roughly a jump ball 50-50 race.
Okay, so how do you win your state back? Cause I just interviewed your colleague, Senator John Fetterman. He has some thoughts. I mean, it's a very interesting state. You've got a Democratic governor, you've got Senator John Fetterman, who has gone further to the right, certainly, ever since Dave McCormick beat Senator Bob Casey, who is like kind of a legend in a way in Pennsylvania. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you find a Democrat that can win Pennsylvania statewide? I mean,
So it's a 50-50 state, to your point, Democratic governor, but every other, the other four statewide Republican row officers, as they call them, are Republican. You also, it's one of the few states in which you have a split Senate delegation, Democratic senator and a Republican senator. And it is a state that, again, the last three presidential elections has been decided by no more than 1.5%, extremely small margins. I think the reason why is that if you look at all 50 states, the state that comes closest to mirroring the national demographics is Pennsylvania. Urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, racially, ethnically, pretty similar to the nation as a whole. And then the fact, finally, that Pennsylvania's size is the fifth biggest state in the union, fifth most electoral college votes. All of that lends itself to, Pennsylvania being really, I think, the keystone to unlocking 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, in terms of how you win, there are a couple of cross-cutting pressures going on, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally. So if you go back 35 years ago, presidential election 1988, the Pennsylvania map looked almost entirely different from how it looks today in two respects. Number one, in southwestern Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, very blue collar, largely white area. Used to be very union, still has some union presence. Mike Dukakis, the 1988 Democratic presidential candidate, who lost nationwide and narrowly lost Pennsylvania as well. He carried every single one of those counties. Every single one of those Pennsylvania counties that borders West Virginia, and he carried West Virginia. You go across 300 miles to the eastern part of the state, the area where I'm from. I'm from Philadelphia, but if you look just outside Philadelphia, every single one of those suburban counties was largely Republican. In fact, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, which demographically is very similar, ironically, to Montgomery County, Maryland, very affluent, high college educated population, high socioeconomics. That was 2-1 Republican back 35 years ago. What has happened is over the last 15, 20 years, and especially since Trump has been president, both have moved in opposite directions. Democrats are doing better than ever, including this past 2024 election in which we lost statewide. The numbers out of suburban Philadelphia, better than ever. But in southwestern PA, as well as other blue-collar counties in Pennsylvania, Republicans had their best election ever. So the candidate who will be able to win in Pennsylvania is someone who will be able to continue that growth in college-educated areas, as well as doing a little bit better in terms of turnout and margins among working-class non-white populations in places like Philadelphia, especially heavily Hispanic wards. But at the same time, get the kind of numbers that Biden was able to get in 2020 in those non-college educated blue-collar counties that aren't in Philadelphia or suburban Philadelphia. That is absolutely the key to victory in Pennsylvania, whether it's for the presidential race or any other statewide race.
Do you think Scranton Joe could have won?
That's a different question. First, he did win in 2020. He won by 1.2%. He did exactly what I just talked about. Impressive numbers for a Democrat in suburban college-educated areas, much more so than anyone expected. And he was able to make those marginal improvements in places like Erie County and Northampton County and other kind of blue-collar pockets where Hillary Clinton in 2016 had really badly underperformed. I mean, the question of would he have won in 2024, I mean, it's an interesting historic, game. But frankly, for someone who wants to win in 2026 and 2028, I can't stand any wasted effort wondering about what would have happened in 2024. Frankly, it's as relevant to me as someone asking, geez, if Lyndon Johnson had done a bombing freeze a few weeks earlier when Hubert Humphrey won in 1968. They're both equally irrelevant to whether or not they are irrelevant to whether we win in 26 and beyond.
You model a candidate that was like Joe Biden.
That's a different question.
So if he could have won, I mean, what we're basically saying is that a white working man who came from that state, working class vibes, if you get someone like that to run on the Democratic ticket, do you think you could have won rather than having?
To be clear, I don't think the person necessarily has to have my same skin color in order to do well in those areas. Case in point, Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, I mean, did so much better than any Democrat since him in the kind of areas that I just talked about, Erie County, Northampton County, et cetera. So, people are interesting. I mean, think about this. 11% of Pennsylvania voters voted for Barack Obama twice and then voted for Donald Trump at least once. Trying to understand that, I mean, that's part of what makes politics interesting, fun, and also sometimes maddening. Trying to figure out what's going on there. So we always try to look on paper, just like sports. We try to look at who's going to win on paper, but the game isn't played on paper. It's played in real life. And there's no way to quantify or account for a candidate's charisma, authenticity, genuineness, likability. You really can't, put something into a computer or into AI and spit out the perfect candidate.
It seems like the Democratic Party tries to do that though. Like that's their thing because they're trying to tick all the boxes and then they don't end up getting a candidate that necessarily connects. That's been, I mean, not since Obama, really, if you think about it. I mean, he was like electric. He transcended parties. I was just wondering, like, how would you interpret Fetterman's rightward shift recently? I mean, everywhere he goes, he's asked if he is a Republican. He co-sponsored the Lake and Riley Act. He was the lone Democrat to do it in the last, Congress. And then you actually joined this time around in this Congress and voted for the Lake and Riley Act. Like, should we interpret this that Pennsylvania is getting redder and that is why you both are?
No, I mean, so first, John Fetterman is his own person, just like I'm my own person as well. I had voted not specific, so this gets into kind of the parliamentary procedure. There were two entirely different bills that were both named the Lake and Riley Act in two different terms. There was one last term called the Layton Riley Act, named after victim of a really horrendous crime in Georgia. In that piece of legislation last year, the whole first page was a listing of what they called findings, the Republican authors of it, including accusing Joe Biden of her murder, saying it was specifically Joe Biden and his policies that resulted in her murder and losing her life. There was other sort of incendiary language that was really outrageous in that, which actually is what prompted me to vote against it. Fast forward to this year, just last month, a different bill is introduced. It has the same title. None of that was in there. It was specifically about the policy as to whether or not someone should be detained if they're here unlawfully and they committed a crime. That's always been my position. I voted for other pieces of legislation consistent with that, not just this term, including one that also passed in the last month or so. By the way, that used to be the common sense Democratic position back when Barack Obama was president. I think our party made a mistake in moving away from that. I think that's where the country is. I'm the son of an immigrant. I know you have a proud immigrant background, your family as well, the same as mine. All four of my grandparents were born elsewhere. We can be a nation of immigrants, but also a nation of laws. And I want to make sure that if we're going to use our political capital on the Democratic side to be consistent as a nation of immigrants, we don't do so in a way that adopts a cause that is so unpopular, it actually compromises our ability to fight for all of those, the vast majority of immigrants who are here for the right reasons because they want to work hard, play by the rules, provide a better life. Studies continue to show that actually, according to the numbers, those who are immigrants to this country actually commit crimes at a lower level than those who are native born. So I've never bought into, nor will I, the sort of demagoguery on this issue. But I do believe that when it comes to someone who has broken the law and committed a serious act, I think we need to be consistent and clear as a party when it comes to those.
I want to open this up to some student questions.
Put your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Got a question?
Hi, my name is Abby. I have this question for Congressman Boyle. Trump and the Republicans did really good breaking into this manosphere on the podcast, on TikTok, and really targeting that young male audience on social media. The Democrats try to do this with the influencers at the DNC, but in 2026 and 2028, how do you think the Democrats can be better at breaking into non-traditional media?
Yeah, this is a great, by the way, it's a great name. It's my daughter's name. So I'm very partial to anyone named Abby. It's a great question, and it's something that I find myself asking. It goes to what I talked about earlier about the rise of these non-traditional or non-mainstream sources of media. I will go basically on any podcast that I'm asked. I will be true to who I am. I think people can smell a phony a mile away. And so, my best advice is just be who you are and don't try to be anything that you're not. But I will say in general, if any candidate came to me asking for advice, I would say don't be so risk averse that you turn down those opportunities. You might be on podcasts where you say the wrong thing, you put it inartfully. I'm asking or answering any question you have here. God knows I probably said something that, got someone angry. So be it. I mean, look who's in the White House right now.
Yeah.
I think that we'd be wise to learn something from that. Not to adopt all of, his policies or the crazy stuff that he says, but don't be so risk averse or afraid to make a mistake.
I think it's because the Democratic Party was sort of the party of canceling. And I think there's a fear that if they say the wrong thing, they
I don't think it was
canceled.
Democrat. I think there was a moment in our culture in 2017, 2018, where that was very popular. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I think it was much larger than just one political party. That sort of movement to immediately cast someone out from society if they had, committed some perceived sin.
Yeah, but a lot of it was just using the wrong rhetoric. using the wrong words, using the wrong pronouns, like it was like people were ready to go after you. And so now Democrats have to try to become more relatable again after, years of.
I've always appreciated, I think someone who has actually spoken well on this topic repeatedly was Barack Obama. He has referenced the fact that, we all have older relatives who might put something in a way that might not be entirely politically correct, or the language that is used today. That doesn't mean they're necessarily bad people or they should be canceled. There are a lot of people who have a good heart and good intentions, but might put things, in a different way. I very much believe we should not be about canceling them or dismissing them. And I think that sort of instinct actually turns a lot of people off.
Right, definitely.
Oh, there we go. I'm from PA5 Delco, so happy PAs in the house. But my question is, it really seemed like Joe Biden would not push back on the left at all. It really felt like Bernie Sanders was running his economic policy. And my question is, how can Democrats, it seemed like Obama did this more, push back on the left and sort of stay moderate? Because I feel like a lot of people were turned off by some of Joe Biden's policies.
I think anytime, it's funny, it's interesting you have that perception, because I've heard the same question in reverse. I have literally had progressive friends of mine say, it really seemed like Wall Street was running his policies, and why wasn't he more populist or more progressive? I've had that said to me by including, I'm thinking one particular good friend of mine is in my district. So I think some of that is the perception of the person who is asking the question and where they're coming from. But it does speak to a larger issue, and that is anytime you're in the majority, it is challenging to keep everyone within your tent rowing in the same direction and on the same side. As time goes on, we'll see how Donald Trump and his side struggles with this, especially with such a small majority in the House of Representatives. You can have a coalition, and structurally speaking, I actually think, all things being equal, the Democratic side always has a little bit of a harder time or a more difficult time, because frankly, we are a more diverse party, and I mean that in the true sense. We're more diverse ideologically, ethnically. The Republican side is more homogeneous. And so sometimes that actually makes it, now I wouldn't want to be them, but it does make it sometimes a little bit easier. Whereas, we have to go the extra mile. That having been said though, if you want to take a look back at the last 4 years, which frankly for 2026 and 2028, I do not want to do, because I believe every election is about the future, not the past. But if you were to take a look at 2021 and 2022, you would say, wow, Joe Biden was able to get through a robust agenda that included everyone from Bernie Sanders and AOC to Joe Manchin voting yes. And there's a lot of playing ground in between that. That's pretty impressive. And not just one bill, but on a number of landmark pieces of legislation. I do think, and I continue to have confidence, that Joe Biden will be well remembered in the history books, far more so than his numbers may suggest today.
He just wasn't so great at selling those accomplishments, which kind of goes back to what we talked about
The
earlier.
stagecraft
Exactly.
is part of the job as well.
Anyone else? One more question.
Hi, my name is Mike. We've seen a lot of ridiculous suggestions from Elon Musk and other people on the right, like having elected bodies remove the worst 1% of judges. I tweeted that the other day, and having Congress impeach judges and have them arrested and put on trial for unnamed crimes. But to me, these suggestions seem ridiculous, but I thought a lot of things that people on the right were saying were ridiculous until they actually implemented them. What's the strategy in place to push back against these? I don't even know how to describe them. Other than ridiculous suggestions.
I think it would be a mistake to just laugh off these absurd things that Musk is saying. First, he's the richest person in the world by a mile. Someone told me the other day that if you take number 2 and 3 on that list, they don't equal Musk's wealth. That is extraordinary, something like close to $500 billion now. He also clearly has more power in the Trump administration than I think any other unelected person has ever had in American history. So, there was this debate for years about Trump. Oh, do you take him seriously? Do you take him literally? Is it both? I remember in November, December of 2020, when Trump kept talking about disputing the election results, saying it was a rigged election and doing something about it, I would have Republicans say to me, oh, he'll come around. Don't take that serious. Don't take that literally. Well, then we saw what happened on January 6th. So I think it would be a great mistake to dismiss out of hand what Elon Musk is saying. I think anytime the richest person in the world, this unelected person who sometimes seems like he's the one running the White House, someone with that much wealth who's in that kind of a position, we have to pay attention to what he's saying, as ridiculous as it may sound.
Yeah. He's been described as almost like a presidential spouse.
Boy, I'm not gonna comment on that in
No, he did.
any way.
He did say, I love Donald Trump as much as a man can love another man. Something along those
Welcome to C-SPAN After Dark.
That's why you come here. Thank you so much for your time, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today for this discussion. Here at Sine, we always say convene, communicate, and collaborate, and that goes beyond this room. So keep these important conversations going with your colleagues and communities. If you enjoyed this event, Tara will be back February 26th at 5 p.m. in this room. And if you want even more Sine in your life, our next seminar is February 20th with the Honorable Sylvia Burwell, a familiar American University name, in the room next door at noon. For more information on those events, stop and grab a postcard at the table outside. And thank you so much again to our speakers. Let's get one more round of applause.